news! Justin Trudeau has said that the Canadian truckers are tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorists, and the word violent now has been expanded to include violence against money. This should be really good for freedom. Hello there, you 6 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom. Remember to turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now, because the algorithm works not for you, not for me, but for mainstream media. You will notice how you are fed stories from the mainstream and how independent journalism is extracted and excluded. So that, of course, you remain docile and compliant, don't think for yourself, and demand individual and community freedom. That would be my guess. Let me know what your guess is in the comments below. We have got a fantastic story for you today. Justin Trudeau has called the truckers conspiracy theory believing, tinfoil hat wearing, Nazi, misogynist, racist.
Qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes.
Like that's what they got together for, to do some tinfoil hat wearing and some racism and some misogyny. Not what they said, that they were protesting against vaccine mandates and restrictions against their rights as workers. No, they got together to do some misogyny. Also, and this is amazing, remember at the time they were accused of being violent? Well, there was no evidence that they ever were violent. So do you know what you do to solve that problem? Just change what the word violent means. That's no problem. You were violent against what? Was it people's hearts, people's minds, people's feelings? No, against money. You were violent against the globalist state's ultimate goal, to accumulate wealth. Once they start changing the meaning of words, we are in serious trouble. That's beyond Orwellian. Let's get into this story. During a recent interview with CTV News, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau doubled down on his remarks regarding the trucker protest of 2022, referring to some of the activists as tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists who engage in disinformation and misinformation. You did a bit of disinformation, but then worse than that, you did some misinformation, and you did that while wearing a tinfoil hat. Well, at least I wasn't wearing blackface. When someone believes that your government is trying to inject a vaccine into you to control your mind and track you, and there's a microchip in it, that's almost the definition of a government conspiracy theory. I would say when governments are closing down bank accounts of people that are donating to a protest, that is a conspiracy theory. When a government is evoking emergency powers to shut down a legitimate protest, that is tyranny. When a government is accusing its own population of being misogynist and racist simply to shut down dissent, that is tyranny. Now, I don't think there are many people that are saying that the vaccine is putting microchips, and one of the things that the mainstream does is elevates fringe ideas to dismiss legitimate dissent. And if there is dissent, if there is opposition to their corporate globalist goals, they simply amplify certain voices within it. If you get a protest of 100,000 people, like if you get a sporting event with 60, 80,000 people at it, you're going to get people that get drunk, people that shout crazy stuff. As long as you can continually condemn and criticize individuals within an ordinary population, you don't have to address the real issues. And this is what I would say the real issues are. National governments have been co-opted by globalist interests. We have increasing surveillance, a march towards centralizing currencies, a march towards preventing individual freedom, controlling your ability to have meaningful democratic traction in your community. These are real problems that go beyond left-right type arguments. Remember, here on this channel, what we believe the problem is that we're being turned against one another by centralizing, globalizing interests. And Justin Trudeau, I believe, used the mask of wokeness to distract you from the fact that he's operating on behalf of globalist interests. And that's not the only mask he uses. However, this statement by the Prime Minister differs from his remarks during the onset of the protest, when he referred to the demonstration in its entirety as a fringe minority. So first of all, you say it's a small number of people, but if it's only a small number of people, how can you invoke emergency actions? You don't need to. Both those two things can't be true. It can't be a small fringe and a necessity to invoke emergency actions. So you have to say, God, there's only a small number of them, but by God, are they racist?
I think in all my communications, in the frustration that Canadians were feeling, not just around that, but around the pandemic in general, there was a sense that Canadians really stepped up for each other. People went out and got vaccinated to a higher degree than just about any other country.
Also, you might argue that Canadians coming together to protest mandates is an example of Canadians sticking together. Unless what you're saying democracy is everyone believing the same thing and the impossibility of a public discourse and conversation. Unless that's what democracy means now, is that everyone has to believe one thing, and to argue with that is undemocratic.
The fact that there were some people out there who were actively spreading harmful disinformation and misinformation.
It's very interesting to conflate the idea of spreading the information with spreading the infection. It's a very curious linguistic trick that's being practiced there, that you're spreading disease, that there's something malign and malevolent about it. The fact is, if you're going to have a nation state where you're going to say there's a centralized government authority that represents 50 million people or 100 million or 200 million people, then you're going to have diversity of opinion. If diversity is a good thing, and I believe that it is actually, then that means different communities are going to have different beliefs. Some people are going to be traditional, some people are going to be progressive, some people are going to be religious, some people are going to be materialistic. You can't have one uniform expression of what it is to be Canadian. And if you shut that down altogether, then you don't have democracy anymore. So you have to, of course, smear and malign any dissenting voices to say that these particular voices have no right. Because if indeed people are deeply racist or deeply misogynistic, then those voices shouldn't be amplified. I don't believe in racism or misogyny, but I also don't think that those truckers were misogynistic or racist. I think what they were protesting was the thing that they were saying that they were protesting.
Like, this is real. There were real tragedies, and there were people trying to gin that up and to expand the divisions and the fear.
Yeah, you!
And sense of conspiracy that were out there. We had, as a government, always and will always be extremely patient with people who are hesitant about getting a vaccine or whatever.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for allowing me to hesitate. That's so kind of you. What kind of relationship is he demonstrating that he believes the government has with a population? I believe the government is a service position. They work for you. Here's some money, do some stuff. Not, thank you. You know, like, what is it? It is already implicit in the tone, timbre, and content of what he's saying, what he believes the relationship between the government and people to be. We've been so patient with people that are hesitant. We're not children in a school. We're an adult population with free will in a democracy. There needs to be an adjustment of the entire perspective of what these relationships are. Also, they weren't that patient, were they? Because they were mandating vaccines for certain workers. We've been so patient with you. Now, if you want to keep your job, take this fucking medicine. And the information around that is continually evolving. The way that this narrative is developing is not, see, we were right. See, Pfizer made all that money. See, there's been no adverse events. See, it's really, really worked. This is not the I told you so moment for draconian authoritarianism under the veil of liberalism.
But those people who were actively putting people's lives in danger by spreading falsehoods,
or pepper spraying protesters, or saying that there were Nazis at a protest, or freezing the bank accounts of people in a democracy that wanted to fund a protest. What about those people?
around science that will help and heal and save people.
You can't call it just science when it is corporatized and commercialized to the degree that it has been. Until you have a model where pharmaceutical companies are meaningfully regulated by an independent body and where their profits are at least not so outrageous, you can't pretend that that's science and not a subset of a commercial hierarchy.
And save our economy and save lives.
Save our economy. Now, I think the economy as a reflection of trade and commerce and financial responsibility and financial health of a population, sure. But when the economy becomes the protection of central interests, then you have a problem. Then you start to see what's really happening here. In a way, there is a deep revelation in changing what is meant by the word violence. You were violent against the economy. Who do you mean by the economy? Do you mean my economy? Do you mean ordinary people's economy? Or do you mean the economy of certain centralized global corporate interests? Now, in trying to justify the government's behaviour, senior Canadian officials appear to be trying to redefine the meaning of physical violence to make sure their actions fit within that definition. The most controversial ones undertaken to stifle the protests, such as deploying riot police and freezing participants' bank accounts, were done by evoking the Emergencies Act, in itself a move controversial enough to warrant a commission inquiry. The Public Order Emergency Commission has issued a summary of a panel interview of 4 senior officials from the Prime Minister's office, while the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and several others were interviewed by the Commission separately. The summary shows that the panel identified areas that they hoped the Commission could comment on, one of them being threats to the economic security of Canada, which carry with them a threat of tangible physical harm and violence. One of the PMO officials, the Prime Minister's senior advisor on strategist and policy issues, Jeremy Broadhurst, is cited as saying that economic disruptions can cause real, direct and personal harms in people's lives. This is spin doctoring. This is saying, well, in a way it's violence because if this were to happen and then that were to happen. That's not what we mean when we say violence. There was a really violent protest, was there? God, where are the casualties? Well, Goldman Sachs lost a fortune. That's not what people mean by violence. By violence you mean they were throwing stuff and smashing things up and that they were rioting. The reorganisation of language in order to create the conditions to use more power is tyrannical trickery. The truckers whose work and livelihoods were first disrupted by COVID vaccine mandates and other restrictions and then by the government seizing their bank accounts would no doubt agree, but they had no government to protect them in this matter. So in a sense, the policies of mandating vaccines were considered an infringement on the human rights of those truckers by those truckers. But no one wanted to have that conversation. And when we've spoken to representatives of that protest on this channel, what they pointed out is no one came to talk to them. No one wanted to have a conversation because it was important to convey a unipolar perspective and not to allow any conversation or dissent. Whether you agree with the truckers or you don't agree with the truckers, the word democracy is supposed to mean an open discourse where you have representatives of the views of the public in congressional or parliamentary spaces so that the will of the powerful is not just arbitrarily inflicted on ordinary people without opposition. Instead, the government appears to have focused on protecting itself from political dissent back in February and continues to do so today, as Broadhurst suggested that a threat to jobs, free movement of goods caused by protests is a threat impossible to separate from the threat of violence, including physical violence. It's not impossible to separate it. Just go, that's physical violence and that's a potential economic disruption. By this mentality, people will be prevented from protesting or striking. What do you think had a bigger impact on the overall population? Pfizer having their record year of profits or some truckers bibbing their horns in Ottawa? What had the bigger impact? What could be more easily classified as violence? Do you think that there are other types of violence that could have been practiced? Who is benefiting from the reordering of words, from what is presented as disinformation, misinformation, and what is presented as violence? The question of what passes off as violence these days in Canada is important because in order to justify using martial law like the Emergencies Act, the government must meet the requirement of facing an unmanageable threat to Canada as defined by the country's Security Intelligence Services Act Section 2. The Emergencies Act relies on the CSIS Act definition. In a previous exchange between a Freedom Convoy lawyer and the Ontario Provincial Police Commissioner, however, the former stated, to your knowledge, there was no credible threat to the security of Canada as defined under Section 2 of the CSIS Act, to which the Commissioner replied, that would be my understanding, yes. So legally, there was no threat of violence unless you change the meaning of the word violence. In November, True North reported Public Safety Canada officials admitted in internal updates that the Freedom Convoy protests were peaceful and that no violence was taking place despite claims by Minister Marco Mendicino. The Freedom Convoy so far has been peaceful and cooperative with police, an internal memo stated on January 27th. Up until February 11th, officials monitoring the situation stated there were no major incidents, that no violence took place, that disruption to government activities was minor, that there were minimal people on Parliament Hill, and the situation remained stable and planning was ongoing. In contrast, Liberal cabinet members, including Mendicino and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, sought to paint the protesters as violent and even as rapists. In late 2021, Trudeau said that the unvaccinated were often misogynists and racist, while also calling them extremists who don't believe in science. So, now we know that when people say conspiracy theorist, what they actually mean is dissenter, and that your opinions and your views are not valuable. And if there's a requirement to introduce more state power in support of corporate interests, they'll find a way of doing it. They will conflate violence towards an economy, which is very difficult to diagnose with so many contributory factors. They will claim that a protest has been violent to an economy in order to judge it as violent and therefore shut it down. It seems that language and the meaning of language is being altered and changed to accumulate more power, to centralise authority, and to justify more and more draconian measures. In short, if you want a surveillance state where individuals are monitored, where bank accounts can be frozen, where ordinary people don't have the right to come together and protest, you simply have to alter the tunes and meaning of language until there's nowhere else for people to go. And I believe that that's what this story demonstrates. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these, turn on the notification bell and subscribe now. But more important than any of that, please stay free.